2019, our city council work session. We only have a couple of items on our agenda today. I'm assuming I said to Ms. Pinkerton today that democracy must be working because they're here to make it, or at least to give us some ideas of how we can make that process a little smoother. And we also have upcoming agenda items. Are there any items that you all see on the list that you'd like to bring up before I turn the meeting over to our manager? Being none, I will. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. In terms of future agenda items for work session, Ms. Ritter and I met with Adams Outdoor Advertising sometime back in the fall. We had requested a work session that they be permitted to present. I know there's been correspondence between the manager and their representative. I think there was a trading of information, but I do not see that yet on the agenda. Could you give us an idea when we might expect that to come forward? Thank you.
Yeah, it'll be in February. We haven't finalized the date yet, but it's going to be scheduled in February.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other concerns or questions? Thank you, Mr. Bass. Mr. Manager?
Yeah, just one quick thing before I turn it over. It's kind of the Lynn Pinkerman show today, but right before she talks to you a little bit about the voting precincts, just wanted to remind you of one thing. End of January, we have coming up on the agenda approval of the CIP, and we talked when we did the initial presentation and encouraged people to submit questions. Don't have any yet, so I just want to encourage you, if you have questions about that, it'll give us an opportunity to be able to give you answers before it's on the agenda to vote. So just encourage you to do that.
When did you say it?
I think it's the 22nd, I believe, if I'm correct. And with that, the main topic is I was kidding a little bit, but is a change to voting precinct boundaries, and I know Mary Lynn's been working on that really hard, and we got the information, and that's what she's going to talk to you today.
Before we move on, I just wanted to ask a question with the CIP coming, although it's probably not exactly a CIP issue. We are supposed to be getting report, and I see Dr. Lucente here, so hi Vicki. We're supposed to be getting reports back on how the money was spent for the school buses, the technology upgrades, safety. Are we going to get those back?
Yeah, I'll coordinate with the superintendent. We talked a little bit, but we didn't have a specific date. But I'll follow up with him and make sure you have it.
Okay, because there are, there's still questions in the public, and also with the Healthy Chesapeake, they're supposed to give a 6-month report.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to really thank the City Attorney's Office and the City Manager's Office for allowing us to go ahead and present this to you, even though you will not be voting on it until the 22nd. It is a comprehensive study, and I think that you're going to need some time to maybe look things over and ask any questions if you have any questions. We've spent the majority of our December, after we recovered from the election, my deputy, George Bryant, and Mary Moneypenny from the GIS department in IT. We have worked intensively. This is a comprehensive study on looking at the voting precincts as a whole. What can we do with the whole city to make sure we are ready come presidential 2020? They passed a law in General Assembly, and as of July 1st, we are frozen on our boundaries at February 1st, 2019, for 2 years because of the census. So anything we want to do to prepare ourselves for the presidential election has to be now. So what we've done is we've looked at the city as a whole. If you want to go ahead. And what we are going to look at is the statistics of what we have here in the city, and look at the goals that we had in this study. It started out being 1 or 2 things we were looking at, and it just kind of snowballed into an view of the entire city, taking into consideration many things that had been asked of our office. I'll show you the reorganizing plan, what it will do to our voting equipment, or maybe what it won't do to our voting equipment, and election officials and staffing needs based on the reorganization. Right now we have approximately 161,551 registered voters. That was as of December 28th. That is a ever-changing number as we register people each day. People move in and out of our city. An ideal precinct in the city would have 2,500 to 3,500 registered voters. Currently, we have 63 precincts, and of those 63 precincts, we have 10 of them that exceed the 3,500 comfort level that we like to see. In years past, what we have done is when they would redistrict, that's when we would look at those precincts and look at splitting them, which would have created 10 new precincts at that point. However, we were looking to limit the number of new precincts and heal the split precincts. We had two precincts, Chittum and Taylor Road, that have split districts within them, creating two ballot styles within the same precinct. You never want to have that if you can help it. We were looking to downsize, as I said, the precincts that had over 3,500, because that's when you start running into more traffic at your precincts, as well as longer lines and things like that. And evaluate also our polling locations, especially where we're currently using schools. We knew that the schools, because of safety issues, did not particularly want to be precincts if we could help it, and they did provide us a list in which it's prioritized how they would like for us to come out. When we first started this project, we did not have that list, so we just kind of went gung-ho with whatever we could do at the time. As a result of our reorganizing plan, we did create 2 new precincts. However, we are going to abolish 2. Therefore, we still stay at 63 precincts, not adding any additional. The major challenges we had were moving the precinct lines in the least disruptive way for voters. We didn't want them to have to go farther. We wanted them closer to their precinct. We wanted to help them as much as we could, and not have to go looking for new equipment, new election officers, things that were going to add to our budgetary constraints. Also, one of the challenges in finding new precinct locations, it has to be either within the precinct boundaries or no farther than a mile from that precinct. Trying to find a public building or a school or church that's ADA compliant, has the ample parking, and most of all is willing to have us, is always a challenge. Because we're adding 2 precincts but taking 2 away, there is no need in this plan for any new equipment. We can use what we already have. Let's look at the reorganizing. As we stand right now, this is what our precinct lines look like after redistricting in 2011. And then if you will go to the next, this is what we changed it to. And we did this in groups, and I'm going to explain that to you. We looked at each division based on the ballot style. What was the congressional, the Senate, and the House district that they were voting? We couldn't change their districts. We had to keep them within the same district. So we just looked at the big picture on the map of all the precincts in that grouping that had that district combination and needed to vote that particular ballot style. And so we're going to look at these today by groupings. The Congressional District 3, Senate 5, House 77. I've listed to the left the 15 precincts that are included in that district combination. The majority of these precincts fall in areas that have small churches and cannot handle large numbers of voters at one time. And we currently are using 4 schools because those were the largest places in those areas that we could be in as a voting location. However, I did find where if we moved the line between Camelot and St. Julian's, that we could balance out the voters there. The St. Julian's precinct uses the Moose Lodge, which is a wonderful large facility, so they could handle some of the overflow from Camelot, which also moves some of those folks and balances it out so that come a presidential, we won't have long lines at Camelot. So that's our first recommendation that we found with that district combination. And behind each of these groupings, you'll see the maps. The map of the yellow that you see for Camelot is what the current boundaries are. The blue that you see where it's a smaller, more condensed grouping, that is where the new precinct will be. And then if you go to your next map of St. Julian's, the portion to the left of that pink line was part of Camelot before, but that's the part we were going to pull into St. Julian's to better balance our voters in that area. So that's our recommendation for that grouping. The next group we looked at was Congressional District 3, Senate 5, House District 78. This area has 7 precincts. It's a lot of the Greenbrier area, which is a lot of commercial property. Very few options for voting locations. However, we did find a solution where we could come out of Greenbrier Intermediate by eliminating the River Birch precinct and reworking the lines between the surrounding precincts, B.M. Williams, Parkways, Fairways, Green Tree, and Cypress, and balance those voters, and that was how we eliminated one of the precincts to allow for one of them that we created. So those boundaries have moved. If you look at the next page, while it looks like a large area, like I said, a lot of this is commercial area, but where the pink is where the precinct currently is voting. And they are at Parkway Christian Center. They're within a mile of their boundary, but with the redrawn lines using that lime green that's on the map, that would be the new boundaries for B.M. Williams, and it would also pull that polling location into the precinct boundaries, which is ideal. Looking at the next one, Parkways, the salmon color is what the current boundaries are. We have shifted it to where the green is, and those folks will still vote at the Greenbrier Presbyterian. They will still be within a mile of their boundaries. The next one is Fairways. We recently changed Fairways. We were no longer able to use the Greenbrier Church. They terminated their voting location lease, and we moved to the First Norfolk Church on Volvo. It's a satellite of First Norfolk. Wonderful location, wonderful big building, nice parking. They could handle a lot more than they had in their precinct. So we used that area to absorb a lot of what came out of River Birch. So that particular precinct moves from the mint green into the lime green would be the new boundaries for that precinct. And of course that would now pull that precinct right into that that voting location into that precinct. Green Tree, we didn't do a whole lot with this one. That one has the blue as the old precinct lines and the new precinct lines are in the green. We took in some of the folks that are down closer to where they vote at Harvest Assembly. It'll be a little closer for some of those voters down there. And then Cypress is our next one. The purple location, again, a lot of this is commercial out in that area. The purple is the old boundary lines, and the lime green is the new boundary lines. Unity Renaissance would still be their voting location, and that is it for this grouping. Are there any questions on that? That's a pretty big section where we did a lot of juggling of lines, but because they're all within the same district, they could be moved and still vote the same ballot. Yes, still within federal guidelines, absolutely. Yes,
And
ma'am.
everything that's in the lavender to the left of the green line is not included anymore?
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
all right.
I think that
And where
one
did they
went
go?
with
Where did they
one
go?
of the previous, I believe that went with Parkways.
Okay,
Yeah, this one we kind of just redid all of the lines to make them as even as we could. And like I said, abolishing the River Birch precinct to allow for expansion in some of the other areas. The next is the Congressional District 3, Senate District 5, House District 81. There's only 2 precincts in this area. Unfortunately, we are in the Treacle Elementary School. This is another area that only has small churches. The only public facility out there is this school, and that's why we're there. And in order to come out of that school, we would have to make a lot of splits. Yes.
What about taking them to the Moose Lodge?
It's the wrong district combination. We
okay.
had to keep that district combination,
Okay.
which is
It's
why we
closer.
only looked at certain ones together so that we didn't have that conflict.
yes, I was thinking too, because that's closer.
It would be, yes,
would
but
be,
because the
okay.
district lines, that's all
Right.
that falls within that district combination.
Okay. All right, gotcha.
So our recommendation right now is to stay put with those 2 precincts. We will continue to look for other viable options for moving out of Treacle, but as of right now, the recommendation is to leave those alone. The next combination.
Mary Lynn, excuse me,
Yes.
the one, and I'm familiar
Sure.
with that precinct.
Okay.
The good news with that precinct is, for the near term, is that it is a direct in and direct out for voters, that they don't have to go in or through the school building. They
Right.
go directly into the room where they vote and they come directly out.
Right.
the-
And we've always made it a rule that we try not to be in the elementary schools. If we're in there, it's generally because we had no other options. But we've worked with the schools, and it's been great how we've been able to try to remove from the flow of the students.
Right.
Okay, our next one is Congressional District 3, Senate 14, House 76. This has 5 different precincts in it. This was one I was really excited about. Chittum just moved to Alexander Baptist Church last year. Wonderful location. We have heard glowing things.
Yes.
And what can make it even better is we've healed the split that we had in the Chittum precinct with this by absorbing those voters into the Bailey Creek precinct, which has the same district combination. That would no longer be a split precinct. The other things we did out there was just moving lines between Churchland and Silverwood to better balance the voters out there. So those meets and bounds would need to be voted upon. They are both in schools, and I probably should have mentioned this before. While our boundaries have to be changed by February 1st, I did find out from State Board we can still move polling locations. So we've got some options that we found when we were looking, and we will be looking to see if there is something outside of the schools that we could move Churchland or Silverwood. But our main priority was getting the precinct lines taken care of first, because that's what we were bound by the law to be done with by February.
So you can move the location.
I can move the
Should-
location, but not boundaries after February
Should
1st.
construction start at Chittum, then you're still looking and you could.
Chittum's already been moved.
Okay. so
That one's a
that's
done
it.
deal.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
And none of these lines would affect that?
Correct.
Okay.
other than healing that split where and it's only 46 voters. But if we pull them into that Bailey Creek precinct, it heals that split, and we only have one ballot style in Chittum.
That's better.
The maps are right behind that section showing where we can better balance. It was just some small changes on Churchland. And then on Chittum, that top portion where you see the purple, that is where we had the split. And it will pull those folks into Bailey Creek, and that will heal that split. Silverwood, the blue areas where they currently are, and we will be taking them over to the red line, so it will pull a few more folks from Churchland, whereas Churchland had an overabundance of folks. It will better balance between Churchland and Silverwood. And then Bailey Creek is just shown on your last map, showing where we pulled the section from Chittum into Bailey Creek. Our next grouping was 3-1876, and this one only had 2, and we would have loved to have fixed this one, but based on the way the map is drawn, these are 2 areas. At the top is part of Suffolk, and at the bottom is part of Suffolk, and so there's too much space in between where this Taylor Road split is and where Nansman is to pull those 2 together. So that will be our only split left in Chesapeake if this is adopted. Neither one use schools, and so right now we recommend that we just leave this one as it is. Our next is Congressional District 3, House 18, Senate 18, House 80. Both of these are in really good shape, Taylor Road, other than the split that we cannot heal, and then Pughesville. Neither one are in school, so we're recommending that we don't make any changes there. Congressional District 4, Senate 5, House 77. Again, only 2 precincts fall in this area. One of them is using Jolliffe Middle School. However, Sunray 2 is at St. Mary's, and St. Mary's can't really handle the overflow of trying to combine these 2. The only public facility out there, and that's why we're there, is Jolliffe Middle School. Unfortunately, right now we don't have a solution for that one, but we will continue to look for other things out that way. The next one is Congressional 4, Senate 5, House 78. There's only 1 precinct in this grouping, therefore we don't need to do anything with that. We just moved from River Oak Church as they do their construction and terminated their lease with us. Moved to Mount Olive Baptist Church last year, so we're not in a school or anything, so we don't recommend anything there. And the same with your next one, 4581 only contains Riverwalk. It does not use a school, it uses the community center, so again, no changes are recommended on that one. Our next one's one of a big changes. Congressional District 4, Senate District 14, House District 21. That is our waterway precinct. They are almost at 5,000 voters, which is far from ideal, and we definitely wanted to address this before we go into the 2020 presidential. We saw longer lines that we had to address in this last election, and major red flags that if something wasn't done, we would have long lines at that precinct. Also, it uses Greenbrier Middle School, which is not in the boundaries of the precinct. It is outside the boundaries, right at about a mile away. What we found that we can do here is split this into 2 precincts, move it out of the school. We have a location set up for the original portion of waterway. They would now go to Redeemer Church is willing to have us. Wonderful location right on Centerville. Can you go to the map? As you'll see here, a lot of area here is just land, and we know that there will probably be growth eventually, but as of right now, there would only be about 2,000 voters going to the Redeemer Church, and it would be in the hot pink highlighted area there on your map. If you flip to the next portion, that top portion in the pink is what we want to make Waterway 2. I have it on here as still being at Greenbrier Middle School because we wanted to get the lines taken care of first. There's several options out there for us. I have one that I've already been in contact that seems really excited and would be a perfect location. So I have great confidence that we're good to go with that one, but I don't want to let the cat out of the bag before they're ready. So in a worst case scenario, these folks could still go to the middle school. It's still legal within the 1 mile boundary, but we hope to bring them closer to home for their voting site. Congressional District 4, Senate 14, House 76. This has 4 precincts in it. We had already taken care of Chittum with the other, so that's now wholly contained in this grouping. And Jolliffe and John T. West are in pretty good shape. John T. West is a little large, but their voting location can handle it. We've not had any complaints. There's not a backup of lines, so we recommend to leave that one as it is right now. However, Deep Creek is at about 5,000 like Waterway and desperately needs something done before a 2020 election. So out there, what we found was that we could split this almost in half and keep half of them still at the community center, which is where they're already used to going to vote, and the other half we could send to New Life Church on Shell Road, and they've already said they're willing to have us. Wonderfully big, nice parking. They've already agreed to have us. And the maps are right behind, showing that all of that purple area was what Deep Creek was at as it stands right now. What we're proposing is within the orange lines, the orange lines would continue to go to the community center, and then the top portion would go to the New Life. So I think that would be a really good situation for us come 2020. Moving on to Congressional District 4, Senate 14, House 77. There's only one precinct in that area, Sunray 1. So they're kind of locked in as being their own ballot style. No changes can be made there. And they don't use a school, so no recommendations there. This one is our humdinger. This is Congressional District 4, Senate 14, House 78. This has 15 precincts within this area. While it's a little overwhelming, it allowed a lot of room for moving things around. And so basically we just redrew the lines to make sure that we had them at an ideal balance of voters, that the precincts could handle them. We did locate a couple of possibilities for relocating 2 of the voting locations, but it will depend on the facilities agreeing to have us, so that's going to have to be more to come on that one. But basically, we just redrew all the lines out there to better balance the folks and bring them closer to their voting precincts. This also pulled in one of our precinct locations that we're voting at now, pulled it into its boundaries, and that one was the Cooper's Way precinct. If you look at your chart there, this is where you really can see the balance, how some of these were at 4,000, 3,000, but then some were at around 2,000. So what we did was we just better balanced everything so that nobody was over 3,500. Some of the ones that could handle some extra folks, we moved them there. And hopefully this will just better prepare us for the 2020 election so that we aren't overwhelmed in certain precincts while others could handle a little extra traffic. And these maps just show what the precinct was and what the precinct is. This is Greenbrier. The green is what it was. That one's not changing a whole lot. This just took a little piece out. So it would be within the pink lines there. Hickory Middle, that area, we pulled just a few folks from there because they were pretty large. And while the facility can handle it, we just wanted to better balance out in this area and bring folks closer to home. Great Bridge Baptist looks like the biggest change. It's pulling most of the folks that are right there at the precinct, pulling them, they will stay right there, but then those folks that are further south, they will now be at Cooper's Way, which will be closer for them. And like I said, it also pulled Cooper's Way, into the boundaries. Bridgetown, this was just a small modification. The purple is what it was. Again, if it could handle more, this boat's at the Mount, wonderful large church. We knew they could handle a little extra at that precinct, so we pulled a few folks into there. So the hot pink is the new boundary lines. Pleasant Crossing, the green is the old, the pink is the new. Again, could handle a few extra folks, so we just pulled some from the others to better balance there. This is one of our biggest changes is Cooper's Way. Like I said, the turquoise area is what the precinct was, and as you can see, the voting location was just slightly out of the precinct boundaries. It was within legal limits of a mile. But now with the redrawn lines, those folks further south can go there instead of going all the way up to Great Bridge Baptist, and it did pull it within the boundaries. Clearfield, not a whole lot of change there. We just better balanced them with Greenbrier and just took a little piece and added to Clearfield. Parker Road, we took a few folks out of this one. The turquoise is where the lines were drawn. The pink is where they are being proposed to move to. Again, this one was getting a little large. Certain elections that were larger were harder on the staff at that precinct, so we just wanted to give a little relief there and make sure we didn't have any lines. Centerville, this was just another part of our balancing act, so that's just pulled in a few extra votes. They have a nice large facility at Centerville Baptist, so we just pulled some extra folks to that one. And finally, Congressional District 4, Senate 14, House 81, has 7 precincts. This one is a little more confusing to understand what we did on this one. We are eliminating the current Green Sea to give us that extra precinct we needed to add. We are absorbing that in with Bells Mill, Grassfield, Lake Drummond, and Shipyard Road. It was all balancing within those. The only school we use out there right now in that grouping is Grassfield High School. So as of right now, they're okay, but they were overloaded. So we pulled some of the folks out of there so it would be less traffic in the school and better balance them with Grassfield. Now what happened to Grassfield, if you'll notice, it went from a teeny tiny precinct to a large precinct. But we can do that because we're going to use the Mount Missionary Baptist that was used for Green Sea as their polling place. So it's a nice big facility, can handle the number of voters, and a lot of this was just redrawing lines to pull from the Grassfield and Bells Mill area. And this shows Bell's Mill, where it currently is drawn, is in the orange. We moved, it will be within the red now. So they gained some, lost some, better balance of voters with the area. And if you look at the next one, Grassfield, we pulled extra folks into that were overloading Bell's Mill and pulled them for that area. And like I said, that's the one that, even though Green Sea would be abolished, we're going to keep their voting precinct because it's such a wonderful facility for us to use. Lake Drummond and Shipyard Road, this was just more of a balancing. We wanted to pull a few folks out of Shipyard and send them to Lake Drummond. Lake Drummond had a nice facility. We recently moved Shipyard Road to Grassfield Baptist. It's a little bit smaller church, so we just wanted to relieve some of the pressure on the traffic at that precinct before 2020 presidential election. Our city attorney was gracious enough to write up the ordinances. I said, how am I going to present this to them where if they change one thing, it's going to be a domino effect on the others? How would you know what you couldn't do, what was affecting the others? So the ordinances are written by grouping so that whatever affects one, if it doesn't go through for some reason, it takes care of not affecting something else that you may pass or let go. So you're safe in that. And we have our wonderful city attorney to thank for that. It's a lot of moving, a lot of shuffling, but I think the voters will be happy. We really tried to take them into consideration while accomplishing our goals in the project. And all affected voters would get new voter cards. There would be signage and advertising, of course, for them. But those that are not affected, we don't want to confuse them. So we probably, unless you choose to, and I'm open to suggestions on that, we would not send, if somebody's staying where they're already at, we were not going to send notifications and confuse them. Only send it to those affected by the changes. Are there any questions? I'll take a breath now.
I have I guess it's sort of self-serving because people on my street will be asking.
Sure.
So on page 41,
Okay.
we're looking at Fairway Drive.
Mm-hmm.
And so one side of the street is one Senate and the other's another Senate. That's
Well,
the boundary line. So there, obviously, you have that to deal with.
right.
Right, okay. So if you start on Volvo and you go down and you stop at the curve on Fairway, that precinct ends there, correct? And if I'm reading
Correct.
correct, they go to,
They go to the Greenbrier Library.
right, to the Greenbrier Library. And then if you look on, I'm just asking on page 47, the rest of that Fairway Drive would then go to
Grace
Community, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So, but if you're on one side of the street only?
Unfortunately, that's how we have to draw the lines
Yeah.
on clear observable boundaries, so we always have to use either a street, which unfortunately does mean that half the street goes one place and half goes to the other.
So I know that one side of the street, on this street, am I right, there's 4 different, you could live on that street and be in one of 4 different voting precincts?
I would need to look at the other side of it. Let's look at Parkways, I believe is. Or no, Clearfield is what is against it, and yes. Yes, they would be, the ones down in what used to be Greenbrier
Right.
would now all go to the Clearfield.
All would go?
the ones in that green area that were in Greenbrier.
Right. On both sides of the streets or one side of the
No,
street?
this side here
Yeah, okay, right.
would go. Can you go to 41? Thank you. On the left side of the pink, that one is the one that is going to be split and go to Clearfield. We had
Okay.
to have a clear observable boundary, but those folks are actually going to be closer to their precinct by going there than they would have been going to the Greenbrier Library. So
But,
those folks are going to be happier.
So the people on the other side of the street will all go to the same precinct?
Yes.
I got you. So there's 3 different.
Yes, we're only showing what we changed
I got you.
in this.
Okay.
Yes,
All right. I just wanted to understand. Thank you.
no problem. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, on slide 24, the E.W. Cheddar, and it was gonna, I think we got it, because this was the one that was divided, I'm sorry, districts.
Right.
But, so Bailey's Creek was added in, but nobody was taken out of Cheddar after they changed to Alexander. No one was moved.
No changes were made to the
None.
boundaries. It was only a
None.
polling
Only
place
the polling,
change.
right.
Last
so
time.
that stays intact.
That
But
will
they-
stay intact. Yes, they will
Right.
continue. The only folks that we're moving is the 46 that are in that
Bailey's
congressional.
Creek.
So when they went to the precincts, they were given a different ballot
Right,
than the
exactly.
majority, which is very confusing for
It
the
was
election
confusing.
officials.
Yeah.
We, of course, drilled them, and they've been wonderful. And the paperwork for them has been a nightmare to have
Yeah.
to fill out at the end of a night because we
Exactly.
have to report to state board a completely different set of numbers for those folks than we had to report for the rest of the precinct. So just pulling those few people and putting them with Bailey Creek, that's going to heal that split, and everybody else will stay at
Stay at the
Alexander
fourth,
Baptist that's
okay.
in Chittum. Yes, ma'am.
And it's the 4th, really.
Yes, it'll be, yes.
Congressional. Mhm.
It's
Thank
just
you.
that portion up there at the top that's changed, and
That's
that's
changed.
currently in the 3rd
In the
congressional.
3rd, right, thank you.
No problem.
I have a couple, just a
Sure.
couple questions. Thank you. I know this was a tremendous amount of work, and you've not only done it in a very organized way, but presented it in a very organized way.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much. And please thank everyone who worked on it.
Absolutely.
Do you feel like if there's a redistricting change, how will that affect your work?
We will have to go back and look at what they've changed, and we know that. We talked about that amongst ourselves. But as registrar, I felt like I needed to do what I could do before they freeze those lines, that I knew we were taken care of, and that the changes I could make were made. We're authorized to make changes if it's based on redistricting.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
So I hope you won't have to go back in and do that, but that
Hopefully
was-
not, but we are going in knowing that that is a possibility.
Okay, but you can change those?
Yes,
because of
those will be changed. We will have to make those changes if that comes about, yes.
Okay. And secondly, my favorite
Mm.
subject, I didn't see any change in the Great Bridge Middle School.
Right.
So we still have people driving 5
Yes.
miles who could walk to 3 other precincts.
Let's see. That one was not even in here, was it?
No.
Unfortunately, just the compact area that is there of voters, and there's nothing off of Mount Pleasant really that can absorb the folks. We have had to use every building available within that mile radius and just take every public building we could, unfortunately. We will continue to look for options to move, and like I said, we can move locations. If we find another location, we can move. But as far as the lines, that particular precinct is a good size.
Right.
It's just a matter of finding it a new location.
Right, I mean, we're still having people that are driving 5 miles from their home when they could walk to 3 precincts, which does seem to be a bone of contention.
And I'm sure it is, yes. And that's part of why we tried to take all these voters into consideration when we made this change. Were we doing something that would benefit them? And that is something we will look at as we continue to look for polling locations.
Okay, great. Thank
Because like I said, we can still do that. We have time on that. This we don't have time on.
you. Okay, so you'd have to move the whole precinct.
Right. I can move the whole precinct as long as I don't change the boundaries.
Okay, and then the other question I had, which I already asked months ago, a couple months ago. You have the ability to put 2 precincts in a location. You have the authority to do that.
We have the
should you
authority,
need to.
should we need to.
Okay.
Yes.
Which is not something I think people really knew about, but if you had a big enough place
If
that
I
was
had a big
willing
enough,
to take
and the
you-
parking to take on 2 precincts
Right,
worth of voters.
right. But I mean, just I think you've done a great job,
Thank
and I
you.
don't think whatever you have left to do would fit into that category,
But it is an option down the road if we need it.
okay.
If we have a place available to us.
Thank you
that'll
both
have us.
very much.
You're welcome.
Ms. Pinkerman,
Yes.
I'd like to really agree with Ms. Ritter. You all have done an awesome job. This is way over my head. I've got a headache thinking about what you present. And obviously, you do understand it because you were able enough to present it to people like myself who have a hard time understanding it. But my overall question, one of your goals and one of the things we've been talking about is reducing the number of schools. And you said that you started that process before you
Yes.
got the priority list. So after you did get the priority list, how did you end up faring?
Not as well as I'd hoped. We did come out of several of the schools, and like I said, we are still going to be looking. There are a couple at the top of the list that I know we can take care of, but some of them we are just so locked in with nothing else available to us within the precinct boundaries that it's going to be a struggle.
So were there priorities, and maybe I need to bring the school folks up to ask, were the priorities based on the construction or the layout of the school, basically?
I think we both agree, in looking at their list as well as our goals, we were trying to come out of the elementary schools first, the intermediate,
good.
the middle, and the high schools last. And that pretty much was about where they were too. There were a couple, based on the locations of the voting precinct within the building, that may have bumped some up, but the general idea is to pull out of the ones that have the younger children first.
So again, those areas, the schools particularly that would be more susceptible to not separating the voters to the students, are there other measures that we can take that would make sure that it's a safe environment?
As of right now, schools are out in November. That's covered. There is legislation, hopefully, that will go through this year, but I don't think it will take effect for, I want to say, another year or 2, but in June, moving those primaries 1 week out will keep us from being in the schools while school's in session. I will say that week is a nightmare for the schools. I understand that that's their last week of school. They have exams, they have field day, they are swamped, and then we come in. I get that, so they are trying to pass legislation to take care of that portion. The only portion left would be the May election, if they could schedule a teacher work day or some type of arrangement. And that only comes around every 2 years. It's not every year. That would be our other ideal solution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, you won't vote on this until the 22nd. If you have any questions after you leave, please feel free to call me. I'll be more than happy to sit down with you or talk with you over the phone and go over any questions that you may come up with. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Hello there. Are any other issues from council members you'd like to discuss before we adjourn?
Got something real quick if I could.
Yes, Mr.
Mr.
Wright.
Manager, I spent some time in and out of Chesapeake General Hospital last week visiting. And I noticed that there's hand sanitizers all over the building. Is there anything we can do with city buildings, because flu season's here, that would minimize getting our employees sick and passing this around?
We'll certainly look into it, work with our folks that do the facility, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you out at 6:30.